Well, here we are talking about Starfinder Afterlight. When I first became aware of Starfinder Afterlight, it was regrettably right after the Kickstarter campaign had wrapped up. So the best I could do at the time was wishlist it over on Steam. Then, via Mortismal Gaming, I found out the developers were taking requests via Steam to playtest a beta build. And after signing up, 48 hours later, here I am, sitting down to record my thoughts. The debut project for Epictellers Entertainment, a small, fully remote studio founded all the way back in 2023 in the beautiful city of Barcelona. I'll link their website down below in the pinned comment. But firstly, what is Starfinder Afterlight? Based on the popular tabletop RPG Starfinder and taking place in the Pathfinder universe. In fact, the planet that Pathfinder campaigns exist on, Golarion, has disappeared during an event known as the Gap. Where once the planet of Golarion resided, or Golarion, depending on how I feel like saying it in whichever sentence I'm talking about, now exists a space station where the descendants of the various races of the Pathfinder universe call home. Orcs, goblins, humans, etc., etc. During the beta test, there are two very clear nods to Pathfinder. The first being Iomedae, who is outright referenced, naturally, as she is worshipped by the Knights of Golarion, a major faction in Starfinder. The second is Discari, clearly the cultist who turns into flies at roughly the halfway mark, took the infestation mythic path. But let's move on to the playtest itself. For starters, it's short. I got roughly 40 minutes out of it, but I've heard you can stretch that playtime to about an hour or so. I just don't know how, maybe exploring the other nooks and crannies of the environment. We start off with a comic book panel style cutscene where we're introduced to our narrator, Roger Clark himself. And look, this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I really didn't think his voice fit the atmosphere of the game. Now don't get me wrong, it's an amazing voice, but Starfinder is a space fantasy, not a space western. Perhaps I'm a little more biased to hearing Amelia Tyler, who could narrate the shit out of the terms and conditions for any product. But yeah, just a small thing that kept reminding me that I was playing a video game. There was one thing though that routinely broke immersion, which was the dialogue. Even though most other RPGs ask the player to click to progress the dialogue scenes, here in Starfinder Afterlight, it felt strange. I kept finding myself sitting back and relaxing whenever characters began talking, just waiting for the next line to appear. I think it's because the sentences are so short, max 2 lines long, or it could just be the way my brain is wired today, but I just wanted to point it out as odds are if it affected me, it might affect someone else too. Either way, the game opens with our character escaping a warp entity and crash landing, taking out a bunch of security robots in a thankfully deserted market square. Now in the beta test, we can't create our own character, which is completely understandable. Instead, we get to choose from 3 pre-made characters, our DPS, tank, and ranged archetypes. I chose ranged only because the character reminded me of Krabopolis Michael. Now this is actually the 6th take of me saying that fucking name, and this one stays in, I don't care, from Rick and Morty. Other than changing our name, there isn't any customization at all. Again, completely understandable. In fact, even in the settings menu, the only options we can adjust are sound related. After we pop out of our pod, we're introduced into our first combat encounter, and we have a fairly familiar 3-action combat model if you've played, say, Pathfinder before. One thing to note though is that ranged weapons need to be manually reloaded after 3 shots. So if you forget to reload and enter a new combat encounter, no doubt you'll be wasting an entire turn reloading. Another thing that will be familiar to anyone who's played Pathfinder Wrath and the Righteous in particular is how accurate you'll be during combat, particularly in the early game. And by accurate, I obviously mean not at all, and lucky too, because I really buggered up this first encounter, like embarrassingly so. And look, I'm just going to let the footage roll just so you know I'm being completely open and honest with you how badly I fucked this whole thing up. Following our first foray into battle, we're introduced to our first companion, and the central force of the game, or so I suspect. The lava, who will act as our moral compass. It's even outright stated that the priest in charge of guiding the lava was trusted to show it the goodness of the world. We're also told that we've been gone for 5 years after discovering thousands of messages on our comms, which leads me into the writing. It's really fun, like really fun. I personally think humor is incredibly difficult to balance. It's easy to go in the over-the-top comedic fashion and come off as goofy, just as it's easy to be too edgy and sarcastic and come across as trying too hard. But no, the devs at Epictellers Entertainment have nailed it. But here we make our way to a bar, and I really have to give praise to the world building. It's just a small asset, 3 NPCs total, a tobacco machine and a jukebox, but it's more expressive than most of the stale bars and shops in many a modern AAA produced RPG. Speaking of, it's easy to brush aside world building in a game based off pre-established lore via tabletop or video game RPGs. But you only have to look at Avowed to see how bad a AAA studio can fumble this notion. And no, I will never stop using Avowed as my baseline for negative comparisons. I must admit I was a little disappointed to see these fantastic avatars failing to match up to their in-game models. Like the bartender here, she's got this cool robotic arm, dreads, and a Caribbean accent, someone you want to have a chat with. And then we have the character model, which can be best summed up with the word woman. After the bar, we wind our way through the city, find a woman ranting about an invisible figure watching over everyone, and eventually we're introduced to Sterling, our third and final companion for the playtest. He will help us find our leader if we help him take revenge on a cult who burnt down his home, which also happens to be a funeral parlor. We're presented with several dice rolls throughout the playtest. I failed most of them except one where I convinced a cultist to stand guard just so I could butcher his friends uninterrupted. Again, the writing was solid. And that's the best time to circle back around into the combat before finishing up and signing off. The beta concludes with a climactic battle with the cult leader responsible for burning down Sterling's home. And I have to be honest, despite approaching this encounter with the aptitude of a full forward in a rugby team, I found it really easy. That's not to say that I expect the final game or even the early access to feature a combat system that's a walk in the park. When I completed the survey at the end of the playtest, I made sure to highlight this very point. I will touch upon performance. Although I'm not running a high-end rig, it's certainly no slouch either. But Starfinder Afterlight really did struggle a lot. One loading screen took almost 3 minutes. Again, beta, but it's important that if you do actually play test a game to provide constructive feedback. I'm sure the dev team is fully aware, and I certainly wasn't expecting buttery smooth performance, but the last thing we need is toxic positivity spreading across the industry like a plague. At the recording of this video, Starfinder Afterlight has no official early access date, but I'm already feeling very, very hopeful. If the devs stand firm and take player feedback on board and continue to flesh out the systems they're clearly started to cultivate with a sense of finesse, I might add, then the final product, which will probably be at least 3 years down the track, is sure to be an incredible experience. I wish the dev team all the best, and I can't wait to rejoin Starfinder Afterlight in early access. Thanks for watching, everyone. I appreciate every second, every minute you take out of your day to watch these videos, wherever you are in the world. Take care of yourself. Have a good one. Bye.
Finally, it's done. Now I'll have to deal with the